of values, a scale that balances individual freedoms and governmental power. At the beginning of this year, we studied history in these terms: the individual versus society as a whole, by reading the works of David Henry Thoreau. Thoreau argued passionately in favor of protecting individual liberties and limiting the power of government, writing, "That government is best which governs not at all, and when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have." In his essay on civil disobedience, Transcendentalism, possibly the first American intellectual movement, gave rise to American fears that government can become a threat to the individual. American society exalts the transcendentalist independent thinker as the American ideal. We view limiting the power of government as a patriotic act. However, there are few clear moments in American history where American society rejected this patriotic virtue. One instance of this is during the Cold War. Another notable instance of this was an event we failed to cover during this year of American Studies, the events of September 11th, 2001. In response to the tragic terrorist attack, our government and the values we place on its conduct changed entirely. Suddenly, American society no longer antagonized the central government as an oppressor of the individual. Instead, they turned to the government looking for a savior, and the government stepped up to implement measures they hoped would protect their people, while seizing the opportunity to broaden their powers. This is reflected in the legislation passed following the attack. An example of this is the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was passed a mere 45 days after 9/11. Put simply, it bans the authority of the government to allow the NSA and the FBI to spy on ordinary Americans. The Patriot Act permits the FBI to conduct sneak and peek searches, or searches of private property without a search warrant. These searches encroach on the rights established by the Fourth Amendment, which protects American citizens against unlawful search and seizures. The act also allows the FBI to obtain citizens' personal information, such as computer or phone records, without a judge's approval, by issuing national security letters, or NSLs. These NSLs reflect the sweeping power that the Patriot Act gave government offices. It is not shocking that government offices have taken advantage of this blank check legislature to investigate more than just terrorist threats. A clear example of this is the fact that the FBI can turn any illegal activity found through the NSLs over to prosecutors, even if the information is unrelated to terrorist attacks. Of the over 140,000 NSLs issued by the FBI between 2003 and 2006, the information found in over 50 of these letters was turned over to prosecutors. However, 0 of these 50 were related to terrorism. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, the majority of the information collected was related to crimes such as money laundering, immigration, and fraud. This illustrates that blank check legislature, like the Patriot Act, justified under a large looming umbrella of national security, is a dangerously steep slope to creating an oppressive government. Yet, despite the fact that it threatens many civil liberties, the Patriot Act was an incredibly popular bill following 9/11. A Gallup survey from 2005 reflects the popularity of this act. The survey asked a random sampling of Americans over 18 whether they think the Bush administration has gone too far, has gone just far enough, or has not gone far enough in restricting people's civil liberties in order to fight terrorism. The majority of respondents said that it was about right, and 18% even responded that they did not go far enough. Strong support of a powerful government, demonstrated by support for the Patriot Act, reflects an ideology of the time. Citizens were willing to give up their freedoms, such as a right to privacy, to the government. And out of this grew a cultural virtue of loyalty to one's nation, where dissent or criticism of government was viewed as traitorous. For instance, when one representative voted against a piece of post-9/11 legislature, she was labeled as a terrorist sympathizer and ostracized by the nation. The piece of legislature she voted against was the Authorization for Use of Military Force, or the AUMF. The mere 60-word authorization granted the president power to use all necessary and appropriate force against those whom he deemed planned, authorized, committed, or aided the September 11th attacks. The AUMF eliminates many checks and balances that ensures abuses of power are not possible. And since it was enacted in 2001, a report by the Congressional Research Service published May 11, 2016, reveals the authorization was cited 37 times to allow U.S. military action to be taken in 14 countries and on the high seas. Representative Barbara Lee, the lone nay vote against this act, feared this exact outcome with incredible foresight. Lee feared that America's judgment was hasty and motivated by fear. In a piece she wrote for the San Francisco Chronicle on September 26, 2001, she argued it was a blank check to the president to attack anyone involved in September 11th events, anywhere, in any country, without regard to our nation's long-term foreign policy, economic and national security interests, and without a time limit. In granting these overly broad powers, the Congress failed its responsibility to understand the dimensions of the Declaration. I could not support such a grant of war-making authority to the president. I believe it would put more innocent lives at risk. Concurrent with the rise of popular support for broadening government powers came an intolerance for dissent. Lee's choice to break unity, regardless of her reasoning, was viewed as selfish and motivated by a public agenda. She receives thousands of hate-filled messages. You should have been in the trade towers. You anti-American bitch. Drop dead, said one. Go to hell, you communist. I hope your constituents remember this come election time. These are just some of the letters she received. The American public was swept up in a xenophobic fervor. In the view of Americans, she had a duty as a representative at this time as to inspire solidarity and unity at all costs. It is unfortunate that society was so overcome with fear that no one stopped to consider the validity of Lee's argument. Lee continues to be viewed as a radical pacifist, incapable of guiding foreign policy. Well, those who are viewed as trustworthy experts are the leaders who failed to anticipate the trajectory of the war on terror. For instance, Senator Dick Durbin, who voted yes to AUMF, in hindsight stated, none of us, not one who voted for it, could have envisioned we were voting for the longest war in American history, or that we were about to give future presidents the authority to fight terrorism as far-flung as Yemen and Somalia, as quoted in a Politico article. Although a response to a real and present threat, the war on terror became a witch hunt, reminiscent of the Cold War, that increased the power of government. As the U.S. set out to fight against foreign threats, intense nationalism and blind support for government peaked. This is reflected in President Bush's address to Congress on September 20th, 2001, on the American government's planned response to the terror attacks, known as the War on Terror. During his address, Bush declared,
"Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists."
A bifurcation arose in society. Representative Lee was viewed as an enemy of the people. At the same time, loyalty to one's nation, for better or for worse, was lauded. Understanding the shift in American society and government catalyzed by 9/11 is essential to understanding the history of our nation and the modern issues we are struggling to deal with today, like the consequences of the war on terror. We can prevent the next Vietnam, the next Iraq, but to do so, we must teach our next generation about the years that followed 9/11 and how millions of innocent lives were lost, civil liberties were ignored, and hatred was allowed to breed when leaders acted hastily, driven by fear, and abandoned deliberation and rational thought in the face of terror. Thank you.